for G.
Okay, we can't.
Yeah.
We can't. So,
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can record a city.
okay, we got. I'm going to call to order the City Council Transportation and Energy Utility Committee at 5:04. And the first item on our agenda is the agenda. I have a motion on the agenda.
Yes, but I would like to make sure that we have listed on items 4 and 5, the addition of action on there, the word action. We'll see what actions will be, but
Replace the words information with action.
sure, I mean, there's information. You can add just
Okay.
that to it. It doesn't matter to me, just so that we have the, it's part of the agenda, and it's that and yeah, I think and somewhere, it could be at the end. I just want to get some clarity. Maybe let's put it at the end of the agenda for the posting on board docs. We had that little conversation I did by email in terms of the access to it.
Where we list
Where things are listed and how they're accessed, so maybe it would be in within item 10, which is the next meeting, since that's what it's about, that we won't have to. So I would make those two agenda amendments and move the agenda as opposed to the amendment.
and I will second that. All those in favor?
I
The next item on our agenda is approval of minutes from our 10:25 meeting.
So I'd like to amend the minutes in the counselors' updates on number 9. It's on page 3. In the first and second lines, it talks about the GMT piece and then the airport expansion piece. And what it really should say is that it would be funding information from GMT, something to that effect. I think that is okay. And emissions and expansion, airport emissions and expansion. There was, I think, a typo in that. It has emissions information from GMT. I was talking about emissions from the airport and it was talking about funding for GMT. So that's sort of, so that would be the amendment to the, because that's what we're going to be doing today. So we want the minutes to reflect what actually we're doing.
So in the second sentence, we would say emissions from the airport
Emissions and expansion.
information
Could say information. I mean, it doesn't.
and GMT funding.
Yes, in the first sentence, it would go funding information from GMT would be fine instead of see what I'm saying?
Is that clear?
I believe so.
Yeah, we understand that. Okay, so yeah.
This way I have a basis for what we're doing today.
Yeah.
So I will second those approval of those amendments.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Me?
Aye, as well. Next item on our agenda is public forum, and I'm thinking that we'll run the public forum now, and then also have additional opportunity to respond after the airport office. You also speak for that item. So you could you can speak now, or you can speak later to specifically to the airport item after the airport gives the presentation. So if you speak now, I'm going to say try to limit it to a couple of minutes, or maybe 3 or 4 thoughts, depending on how much content you want to share with us tonight. And then we'll see how it goes after the items presented. So do we have a sign up sheet?
I do. I had folks sign it already.
Okay, so
you want to go through order? There you go. Sure.
We do have Folks online too. So
We have folks online, so the folks online should raise their hand. We'll start with people in the room, I guess, and then go to folks online after. So the first person we have is Nick Foss. You want to choose?
I'm sorry,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I forgot.
Okay. Nick was online. He's going to present later. We have Nick Porter.
Yeah, I'd like to make a quick comment now.
Okay. You can come right here, maybe.
On, I believe it was November 2nd at the press conference for the new wind generator at the airport. Mr. Longo said that he would like to see the airport become the greenest in the nation. I think that's a sentiment maybe all of us in this room would like to see. To that end, I would like to offer some suggestions. As Mr. Longo probably knows, since he's using the ACERT program to calculate emissions, the airport's International Council has an carbon accreditation program. And I'd like the airport to seek level 4 accreditation with these following parameters. Seek level 4 accreditation and implement a stakeholder partnership plan that shall demonstrate the airport is actively driving third parties, including all tenants at the airport, towards delivering aircraft emissions and reductions. As part of the level 3 and level 4 planning, the BIA must acknowledge the Vermont Air National Guard is a contributor to the airport-related greenhouse gases and include VTAM CO2 emission aircraft flights and base operations in its level 3 emission scoping. Set specific emission reduction goals of at least 70,000 tons of CO2 annually for the VTAM and condition level 4 accreditation and VTAM lease renewal on achieving these goals. Cap total airport emissions, including aircraft emissions at 2010 levels, as recommended by the AIC. With current technology, this means that the airport will have to cap flights and not consider additional growth. Any increase in BA flights will need to be offset with emission reductions elsewhere. Carbon offset programs are rife with fraud and accountability programs. Moreover, environmental disasters such as wildfires and floods put in jeopardy long-term CO2 sequestration efforts. Any BIA program that seeks to carbon offset should be clearly and carefully reviewed by maybe the general public and the city council. And then finally, Mr. Longo, in a double spread advertisement in 7 days the other week, said that he is only seeking to only focused on carbon emissions that the airport can control. So I'd like the city council to consider including all future lease agreements and renewals to include a clause that tenants will calculate their emissions. That way, Nick Longo can then control it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ashley Adams.
Yeah.
Hi.
Good evening. I'd like to start with a few statements. An ever-expanding airport and ever-increasing flights will lead to ever-increasing emissions. Aviation emissions exist even though we don't count them. The earth continues to burn. A small wind generator and a few solar panels do not stop aviation emissions from spewing into the atmosphere. Burlington's net zero plan is a lie because it excludes by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions at the airport, an estimated 158,000 tons of CO2 equivalent combined civilian and military aviation emissions versus a tiny fraction, perhaps 2,000 tons in airport ground operations. Quote, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator," proclaimed Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN at the COP27 Climate Summit, which just concluded. I'd like to juxtapose Gutierrez's statement against the words and actions of the airport director and the mayor, which have been echoed and repeated in countless public statements. In a recent 2-page propaganda spread that I just had here, commissioned by the airport, the pride behind the mayor's words is clear. Quote, "We are excited to welcome roughly 700,000 passengers who take off from BTV each year, and this is just the beginning. We are going to continue this outstanding growth." In further service to growth, Nick Longo flew to Reno in June and met with, quote, 8 different airlines about service to BTV. And in a deeply ironic twist, Nick Longo states his highly contradictory desire to, quote, "make the airport among the most sustainable in the nation." He also claims in the same piece that he cannot control aviation emissions, and yet the trip to Reno demonstrates that he's making every effort to do this very thing. All over this planet, we're seeing mass suffering and the catastrophic effects of climate change. Allowing the planet to heat even further by continuing to burn fossil fuels and pump greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere is dangerous. It's callous, and many would even say criminal. Atmospheric CO2 is currently at 415 parts per million and climbing. We know we need to reduce it below 350 ppm to stabilize our climate system. And in the face of this reality, you have an airport director who is actively trying to do the very opposite. A 2021 survey published in The Lancet of 10,000 young people ages 16 to 25 in 10 countries found, quote, "As a research team, we were disturbed by the scale of emotional and physical, psychological effects of climate change upon the children of the world, and the number who reported feeling hopeless and frightened about the future of humanity. We wish that these results had not been quite so devastating. The global scale of this study is sufficient to warrant a warning to governments and adults around the world. And it underscores the urgent need for greater responsiveness to children and young people's concerns and immediate action on climate change." COP27 closed once again without the bold action Gutierrez called for. This is the reason children and young people around the world despair. Once again, those in power failed to act decisively. Fossil fuel capitalism won. The incrementalism that would have been an acceptable approach to climate change decades ago is no longer an option. It is state, city, and municipal power actors that will solve this. Specifically, it is you. There are already many examples of local governments around the country who are acting decisively and courageously, and Burlington can be one of them. Without bold, courageous, decisive action, you are consigning our children, grandchildren, and future generations to an uninhabitable climate. If there was ever a time to lead, it is now. I'm imploring this body to do the following: stop the airport director's efforts to expand flights at the airport, include aviation emissions from all sources, including civilian and military, and Burlington's greenhouse gas inventory, and actively reduce aviation emissions from all sources.
Thank you.
Chair Burlow, if people have written and are reading them, if they could get submitted into the record, it would save people from having to type it all, and it would save me from having to make corrections the next time, you know. It saved lots of people and would get accurately done that. I mean, they could be done, I think, at the end of the meeting, so that you can have that in case you wanted to hold it, but just so that.
No, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sat in that seat.
Next up, we have Michael Arnold.
Hello, actually, I think that I ask you to consider how our transportation funding mix should adapt during the affordability crisis.
Could you speak a little louder and more clearly for an old person's ears?
Sure. So I'm hoping to ask you to consider how our transportation funding mix should change during an affordability crisis. This is mostly targeted towards GMT. So I'd ask that you consider reversing the sort of decades of public transit austerity that we have seen over the past few decades. In the 1950s, Riverside Ave bus to Winooski ran every 20 minutes from 6 a.m. to just past midnight. And today, less than half of those runs are provided with only 30-minute peak ways. With the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, federal delegation has secured a 35% increase in transit operating funding. If we can commit to increasing our local matches, we can hopefully improve transit service for the people in our communities who most need that financial help. I hope that you'd consider the dense municipalities like Burlington and Winooski, where mile transit service serves many more passengers, should focus on increasing frequency for lower density areas. So I'd ask, what tangible steps is the city taking to take advantage of this new source of funding? And it asks that you consider at least small investments that reduce operating costs and improve travel times, like installing transit signal priority, installing queue jumps at congested intersections, and consider stop consolidation so we can maximize the service provided. Consider bringing back the GPT to improve transit service.
Thank you. Next, we have, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Looks like, maybe the last name looks like Darren Barr.
Yeah, I was deciding it.
Oh, got it. Emily Perry, you know,
You cross it off.
and then, Dan Castellano.
Yeah, that's what I got. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Nick, right? Nice to meet you. Yeah, nice to meet you. Yes, I'm Dan Castrogano, Ward 4 EM. I support everything that Michael said as well. But I wanted to use my time to speak about emissions from aviation. I applied for the airport commission, was voted down, and I've just been processing how to speak tonight and what to say. So I want to empathize with you, Nick and Mark and Gene and everybody. What we have to do is going against the inertia of a couple of centuries of capitalism, of all of us humans who live in the aviation age, which has been around since after World War II. Going against the fossil fuel industry, going against the aviation industry, this huge push of inertia, this tsunami of billions of dollars of fossil fuel marketing and greenwashing propaganda in the aviation industry is all pushing in this way of endless growth. And we can't do that anymore. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. It's the same thing as weatherizing buildings, it's the same thing as EVs, it's the same thing as building out bussing and bikes. And it's just this collective blind spot, right? The Secretary of Transportation, Buttigieg, was with Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago today, tweeting this nice press release about expanding terminals. It's just shocking. Like, I can't believe that aviation is still expanding. I've been working on this for 5 years. I'm an educator, I help teachers teach about climate change. I help them navigate climate anxiety with children, and we just have to stop burning fossil fuels. This is our local airport that we own and operate, and it's just like everything else. We have to have a plan, and so the action steps are measuring emissions and then capping and reducing emissions. That's the only thing we have to do. And if there is no action, we are going to keep coming back. There are concerned humans around the world, fathers, teachers, scientists, who are showing up and saying, all emissions have to come down, including aviation. All emissions have to come down. They have to come down right now. Guterres just said it's the road to climate hell. I mean, he's not mincing his words. And I work on this every single day, and it's just, I'm worried. I'm worried about food collapse and the geopolitical ramifications of that, of the rise of fascism, right? It's happening, and the two words I always come back to are courage and urgency. It has to be fast and it has to be bold. It has to be fast and it has to be bold. We are all mortal. We're all going to be dead someday. And whenever we look back, I taught history for 11 years. Whenever you look back at MLK or Gandhi or Mandela or anybody, the people who acted first, the abolitionists, they were courageous, and there are days named after them. History will be on our side. We can act, we can follow the Dutch's lead. I know Schiphol Airport is a huge airport. We can act, we can be a leader on the national and international stage. And we can take this action, we can make headways. A lot of people aren't gonna like this. Right? There's a few of us here now, the business industry, the tourism industry, there will be huge pushback. But it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So please take action on emissions. be courageous, be bold, and act with urgency. Thank you.
And the last speaker here in person that I have. It will be, probably the writing would say, begins with a J. James. James, yes.
Well, I really want to echo what has already said so well, and I also want to direct remarks to our aviation director and to the committee that it's so essential that we stop the expansion, that we measure all the emissions, and that we reduce the emissions. These are the three things Ashley pointed to. I think these are the things we need to take seriously. It's no longer possible, as has already been said, to continue to expand and expand and expand. And somebody has to take the lead in this country. We've heard from the aviation director that he wants it to be a green airport, the greenest in the country. The way to do that is to reduce emissions. Now, we have one way to reduce emissions that will have zero impact, in fact, a positive impact on our civilian aircraft program, and that is the military program. Let's take a serious look at that program. Is this something that's contributing or detracting? And I think anybody who's been outside at 9:30 in the morning knows that it is detracting and that it is an emissions from Burlington, the city of Burlington, the Burlington Airport, that contributes zero to the economy. In fact, it takes away from the economy, because just one example is housing. 44 acres of land taken away from housing. If that was restored to housing by the removal of that particular aircraft, hundreds of units could be placed on that. If you look at the area right across from the parking garage, which is a huge building, it would fit with that situation to have apartments there, have hundreds of units just in the 10 acres across from the parking lot. And then there's another 34 acres. So this is land that's being taken away, and that's the detractor from expansion of our business and economic growth in the Chittenden County. Is the unavailability of housing. So now we have the combination of emissions and economic growth, and a way to accomplish it by saying, look, a few cents a year rent for 270 acres. What are we getting out of that? Let's put a stop to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Kimberly, do you have speakers online?
We do have 2 people online with their hands raised, 3 people online. I will begin promoting them to talk. Dan Kirk, I will promote you first. Or not promote, allow you to talk, we can start.
Great, thank you. Dan Kirk, I live in Ward 3. I just was exploring with my city councilor Perry Freeman about the possibility of changing the setbacks that are required for solar panels on roofs in Burlington. I explored the possibility of doing so with Suncommon, and the setbacks gobble up so much of my roofing real estate that it is the threshold that would either make it worth it or not. And so I communicated with Perry about this. And Perry mentioned, I'm just quoting from a text, that the setbacks exist to make sure that the fire department can create a vent in the case of a fire if they need to, and they wouldn't have to rip the panel. I'm now paraphrasing, but rip off the panels, etc. The setbacks were a change when they were made from a more strict policy to a less strict policy. And it sounds like from what Perry was able to get, the fire department was open to a even looser interpretation of the state policy. So the fact that these setbacks are, I don't know if I'm the only one, but at least holding me back, and I can imagine others from hitting that threshold of energy generation on site to make it worth the cost and the installation, and, you know, all that sort of fixed cost stuff. I was hoping that you all could revisit that or re-examine that and bring in whomever the experts are from the fire department to maybe change that, because in practice, half of my roof would be untouched. And it sounds like this is a rare enough occurrence, and there are hopefully enough safety mechanisms available to, you know, how we're required to keep our homes alarmed, et cetera, to prevent the need for such venting. So yeah, I was just hoping to float that to you all and urge you to reconsider it, or if there's a way that I can follow along, if that's the possibility. I'd be curious to hear any progress or reason why it can't happen in the future.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Our next person we have up for public comment is Robert Herendeen. Robert, you should be able to speak now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
I'm Bob Herendeen. I live in the 4th Ward. I'm on the Burlington Electric Commission, and I have been frustrated by the fact that our net zero energy program, which is really a net zero carbon program, deliberately stays away from air. I'm old enough, so I have a historical perspective here. Back in the 70s, energy policy had all kinds of ideas except what to do about ground transportation. That was a nut that couldn't be cracked. Well, it's a long time later, and now we think we can crack it with electric cars and efficiency. So my question would be, can we do the same thing with air? And if so, can we do it on a really short time scale, or is it going to be locked into a long one, as automobiles were? If it's locked into the long time scale, we're in trouble because we have a short time scale about emissions. So what I'm coming to is that unless we follow a path, something like we did with automobiles, we have to consider actually reducing the traffic. Rather than hoping for efficiency to save us in the long term, we have to make consumption choices in the short term. That seems to me to be an imperative about air. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah. Next person up for public comment is under the name of Save Public Forests. I've granted you permissions to talk, but if you could state your name for the record, that would be great.
Hi, sorry about that. I didn't realize that I had a different name on there. My name is Dan Batten, like batten down the hatches, and I'm calling from Bristol, Vermont. Thank you for making it possible for virtual attendees to participate. Folks, immediate policy action is needed to ensure aviation emissions peak this decade. If we learned anything from the global climate conference that just wrapped up in Egypt, it's that leadership at the national level isn't going to save us from climate chaos. We're going to have to do this sort of thing locally, and we're going to have to do it aggressively. This action must include capping and reducing the number of flights from BTV. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Silverman, I did receive a question from Ryan Burton about parking and development ordinance on the agenda. It doesn't look like we have anything like that, but he sounded like you were it was something that was,
That's the ordinance committee.
right, okay, yeah, that's what I thought, but yeah.
Wrong place, it's virtual, it is a virtual meeting, so they should like zip over there.
Yeah, okay, so go over to that meeting. Okay, I don't think if there's anybody else online, oh, we do, it does look like we have another person online who would like to speak. Jack Tiano, I will allow you to, or grant you permissions to talk, you should be able to talk. Hello?
Great. So I wanted to speak a little bit from like a I don't know, like an engineering perspective. I reviewed the slides from the airport discussion that's going to come up, and I was really concerned with the way that there's a slide in there that shows the projection of how emissions are going to be reduced over time. And so like the bulk of it relies on this idea of sustainable aviation fuels. And then another small part of it is basically this idea of some unknown technical efficiencies that will just magically appear somewhere around 2035, which is kind of reasonable to expect that will happen, but it doesn't seem to be grounded in anything really plausible or realistic, and it's a small piece, right? So then I guess maybe 10% of it is just actually things that might actually be tangible, refreshing the fleet, airport efficiency, airport operational efficiencies, and so on. But like 95, not 95, maybe like 80%, 75 to 80% of these reductions of the airline industry comes from this switch to sustainable aviation fuels. And so like, I just want to talk on that a little bit. I mean, I'm not like an aviation fuel expert, but I doubt that most people in this room are either. But I just wanted to kind of talk about what the hopes kind of are behind something like this and why we should be skeptical. So basically, a drop-in sustainable fuel would have to be nearly chemically identical to work in an existing jet engine, right? So if we're not talking about replacing all of our jet engines and our jet engine technology, this fuel needs to work roughly the same, right? So if it works roughly the same, it's going to be emitting the same carbon, right? It's burning, it's running the same chemical reactions, it's emitting the same carbon into the atmosphere. So it's not a magical fuel that moves tons of metal and people for free. That's not how technology works. That's not how thermodynamics work. The hope is that these fuels will come from renewable sources like plants or waste. But at that point, you have to start thinking about the flow of carbon. So even if we could grow jet fuel from plants, like on a tree, we'd still be depleting the carbon sink in our soil, processing it into available energy, and then pumping it directly into the sky. Just like we're seeing the depletion of the health of our soil from mismanagement and farming in our agricultural land, we see the same thing in this development of biofuels. And I think that this problem shows up when you have too many people in a lot of different places making promises to each other without really being able to see the whole picture. So like plants don't just grow out of magic. They need nutrients in the soil. And if you create a siphon that sucks those nutrients out of the soil and blasts it into the atmosphere, you're breaking that flow of resources. And so I understand that there are probably a lot of different people working on different problems. When you delegate to the market and say, hey, we're investing time and money and we're making progress on these sustainable aviation fuels, you have to think about where does that come from? If we're taking something from one place, we're putting it somewhere else, right? There's like in the law of thermodynamics, there's a conservation of matter and energy. And when we just kind of think that we can erase that with politics and abstraction, like we're fundamentally missing the point here. And so I wanted to call that out because that was 80% of these reductions. Like even within this model of like, yeah, we're going to use technology and we're going to do these things to make things better. We're going to expand, but we're going to do it right. We're going to do it clean. We're not taking into account what are going to be the side effects of that. And we're seeing right now all of the collapses of different ecosystems are from people who thought that they didn't have the full picture. They were relying on these abstractions and they were relying on these externalities to say, hey, if I do this, I'm just not going to worry about this because that's not within my problem domain, right? I don't really care about how this side effect will affect me. But we're setting ourselves up. Let's say even in the best case scenario that this does work out, like right now we rely so much on petroleum products to like increase our yields to make food. So like if we're going to rely on biofuels in some type of way, like we're still relying on petroleum products to maximize those yields. And so it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop. I really wanted to make sure that everybody is aware that like you can't have something for free. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is from like a thermodynamic level, from an engineering perspective. You can't just have your cake and eat it too, right? You have one or the other. And so that was really concerning to me. I was really hoping that there would be, maybe this gets touched on later, but it was something that I really needed to make a public comment on. And get that off my chest for now, but thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
So we have no one else online. There will, I believe, be another opportunity to speak to the airport item after we go through that.
Yes, time for a minute.
Okay.
So if there's no one else additional in the room who has not spoken, we will close public comment and go to our first agenda item, which is the presentation from the airport. So I'll kick it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. My name is Nick Longo. I'm the Director of Aviation at the Burlington Airport. While we load the presentation, I'll introduce my team here. So on the Zoom, we have three people. Larry Leckie, the Director of Engineering and Environmental Compliance for the Burlington Airport. Marie Friedman is our Chief Financial Officer. Donnie should be coming on in just a second.
Sent him an invitation to promote him, but I haven't seen him through yet.
Okay, perfect. Donnie is our Kolb is from VHB, is our consultant on the sustainability planning process with the airport, as well as an on-call provider to help us through some of our other environmental needs. And then with me in person, I have Shelby Lozier, Director of Ground Transportation, who is also a large portion of this conversation tonight, especially as we go into the Chamberlain neighborhood planning process. So again, thank you for having me tonight. And when we have the presentation, I'll get going. The first part of the presentation, I am going to hand it right over to Donnie to give you a background of our sustainability plan, as well as our were you able to bring up the PowerPoint?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. It's just loaded. It's just.
Oh, gotcha.
Or little computers.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I added to the presentation tonight. First, of course, is our sustainability implementation plan in progress, where we are, the scope of work, and Donnie will facilitate that update. Next, similar to what the caller just mentioned, I do have excerpts from the Federal Aviation Administration and the International Civil Aviation Organization, their climate action plans out. Specifically, the FAA plan recently came out with in April. And then I call the last slide there, the last subject item, the future of BTV. Some of the transition points that we're moving towards, both in the terminal environment as well as the Chamberlain neighborhood area. So with that, I would like to introduce Donnie, who hopefully is on now. I think he is.
Yes.
Go ahead, Donnie, when you're ready.
Okay, why don't you go to the next slide, Nick, if you're the one controlling. Okay. All right, next slide. All right. So my name is Donnie Gores-Kolb. I'm with VHB. I've been working with BTV for a number of years, working with them from various perspectives, from environmental permitting to developing the sustainability brochure from 2019. We are now embarking, and we have started work on the sustainability program, or the management plan. As part of that management plan, we're going to be looking at some technical studies from an energy greenhouse gas perspective, looking at waste management, ground transportation, water resources, and passenger experience. Now, a big differentiator between what was done as part of the sustainability brochure, which, as a reminder, was incorporated into the airport's master plan back in 2020. What we're doing now is really diving in and doing the analysis. So the sustainability takes flight highlights report was looking at what is sort of some of their baseline, some of the activities that they've been undertaking, the initiatives to reduce their energy consumption. Here, we're really looking at trends over time, analyzing those trends, analyzing the numbers in terms of their energy consumption, their waste generation, et cetera, and coming up with very specific targets for reduction, and then also looking at initiatives to support that reduction. As I mentioned, we're developing some strategies, but we're taking a methodological approach to that. So we have to identify what those baselines are, and then identify where the opportunities for reduction are, and then start to prioritize what those, how those strategies are going to get implemented over time. So there are certain things where funding may be available, including through the Infrastructure Act that was recently passed, that may elevate some of the activities and strategies to the front of the implementation schedule. And what are the priorities of the airport as well? Are the priorities in the energy and the greenhouse gas sector, or are they in the waste sector? Do they concern water conservation? I'm hearing tonight that a lot of it is the greenhouse gas emissions, so that'll be reflected in the priorities on the implementation schedule. And what Nick and the airport really want to do is make some big impact. So what are those, big gets, those big actions that, where the funding is available, or where funding can be otherwise secured, can the airport start, really making movements in this arena? And a lot of that involves, the renewable energy related to their scope 2 emissions. But there's a lot of opportunity through partnerships with airlines and the larger aviation industry and other airports within the region to reduce that scope 3 that we've been talking about tonight. We're also developing a program and performance monitoring program. So, just looking at the sustainability plan is a snapshot in time. So like this baseline study that we're developing, we're going up to, I think the baseline year is 2019 or 2022, depending on how much data is available. I think we decided, Nick, that we were moving into the 2022 area. But that is still a snapshot in time. So the airport, based on that performance and based on the implementation of the strategies, is going to want to measure the performance and the value of those strategies moving forward, and how far and how fast it's moving toward achieving its targets in those baseline study categories. And then pulling it all together in a sustainability management plan. And like Nick mentioned, we're sort of on call as well to provide some support in terms of renewable energy development, project enhancement from a sustainability perspective, grant opportunities, and providing some input on that as well. So that's what the project is overall. But I did want to focus, if you want to go on the next slide, on the GHG emissions inventory. So I think everybody in the room is pretty aware that the GHG emissions inventory for the airport was done as part of the previous climate action plan undertaken by the city. That was had a baseline year of 2010, and looked back at potential changes from an inventory that was completed in 2007, or at least have a reporting year of 2007. That only looked at the vehicle fleet, the natural gas, and the electricity supply. So again, just looking at scope 1 and scope 2, and only a subsect of section of the scope 1 emissions. Some things like process emissions and refrigerants and things of that nature, fugitive emissions, were not calculated to my knowledge as part of those previous inventories. But what we want to do as part of the 2019 update or baseline, I think maybe perhaps it was 2019, Nick, so we should make sure that we're looking at the right numbers here. But identifying the current sources of CO2 and other GHG emissions that are generated at the airport. So we want a complete inventory. We want to look at all of the different GHG emissions that have the highest global warming potential values. We want to take a look at the sources within the sectors that are applicable to the airport. We want to quantify them because really that's the first step in understanding where the biggest sources are. Now that's going to be scope 1, and scope 2 is the focus of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. But whenever you look at any airport, it is going to be the scope 3 emissions that are going to be the largest contributor to the overall inventory as a whole. Now, as part of that, what we will be doing is, and what we're in the process of doing, is obtaining a lot of aircraft activity data to include scope 3, at least the aircraft activity component of scope 3 within the airport's overall GHG emissions inventory. And to the extent that we can, now we don't have the background data for the 2010 emissions inventory, but to the extent that we can compare 2019 to 2010 to see how that changed over time. And we want to do that in absolute terms, what the absolute value is in terms of tons of CO2e or metric tons of CO2e. Or we could also, and we also want to take a look at it through the lens of, what was the increase in passenger activity? What was the increase in operational activity? Just to see how you progressed and reduced your emissions on an absolute basis and on a normalized basis as well. Two ways of looking at it. And then, like I said, GHG emissions inventory is the first step to understanding where the biggest gets are, where your biggest sources of emissions are coming from, and developing the policies and the programs aimed at reducing the airport's overall emissions based on where those opportunities are. Next slide. So I won't dive too much into this, but because I did allude to it a little bit, but GHG emissions inventory, and this is a very well educated group here. So scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, that's what the emissions inventory will calculate and estimate. Scope 1 is the direct emissions, so anything that the airport really owns and controls, that's their fleet, that's their fuel combusting equipment. Scope 2 is the indirect emissions, all of the purchased electricity to power their facilities and their lighting. Scope 3 is also indirect, but it's optional to report, but the airport is reporting it this time around. Focused on a lot of the passenger activity going to and from the airport, the airline activity, the FBO activity, owning the GSE, all of those different types of sources within that are owned by the tenants and owned by the public. That's all scope 3. And we have this nice chart here, direct from the ACRP report that governs and guides airport related greenhouse gas emissions inventories in terms of what the typical sources are and what how they fall within the different scopes. Next slide. Okay, I believe I heard somebody mention the airport carbon accreditation program. This is what we're seeking. There are a number of different levels at which you can submit your application for. But basically, for those that don't know, the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program is a global carbon management certification program specifically designed for airports by the ACI and an industry group. It includes a common framework, as I mentioned, the 6 different levels that you can go and enter into and apply for accreditation, covers the operational activities that contribute to most carbon emissions. And I'm not seeing the entire slide there, but we're using the airport carbon emissions reporting tool, the ACERT, which is a self-contained Microsoft Excel document. Basically, it's an industry tool that it can be utilized from inventory year to inventory year for consistency between those inventories to accurately measure progress over time. Like I mentioned, the 6 levels I have listed here in a nice graphic. That starts at mapping, and that's what we're going after right now. That's the first level. That's what you are capturing in terms of your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and optionally some scope 3. The reduction is another level, the second level, when we're talking about proving the reduction over time. So what has the airport done based on a baseline of, let's say, 2019 over the previous 3 years, so 2016 to 2018. And does the 2019 baseline, is it lower than the 3-year average? And that's what the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program is looking for. Now, one note about the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program is that applications need to be verified. So we do the inventory, we submit it, we get assigned a verifier, and we go through the verification process that ensures that what is being done in terms of the inventory is accurate. And represents the full scope of the airport's emissions, particularly within the scope 1 and scope 2 area. The optimization is really, getting third parties engaged in reducing the footprint, and that again, involves a little bit more on that scope 3 side. Neutrality, now it does allow for the offsetting as part of that particular level. Transformation and transition is really going above and beyond. So, transforming airport operations and the business and the airport's, tenants and other business partners to reduce absolutely, emission reductions. So not just by offsetting, but really reducing it on absolute terms. And then transitioning, really looking at, the residual emissions and in terms of what the airport can control and getting some international recognition for that. But that's the highest level of airport carbon accreditation, provided by the ACI. And I think that's it for me, Nick.
That's right. Yeah. So I did just repeat a little bit. So this is an excerpt from our sustainability master planning process as part of our 2019 airport master plan. This is available online. We did not print this. This is only available digitally, and it's a little flip book feature, which again, Donnie and his team helped produce a couple of years ago. So we're not stopping. We're not just mapping this out, just like Donnie said. We're moving toward full accreditation as much as we can, and we can still do pieces of each one of these levels with each particular year. For example, Mr. Porter mentioned making sure that our tenants we're aware of this and we're involved with this, and that's exactly what we're doing, from airlines to simple hangar tenants of ours and many other tenants, to make sure that they include in their designs, in their construction, and in their policies ways so that we can hit not just these accreditation, because although this is nice, we're still moving towards some of the goals that were set in public forum today as well. And that includes us too. You can actually skip the next slide, which is just a recap of what Donnie said as part of the accreditation. So our goals do incorporate everything from aviation, not just the inventory that Donnie was talking about, but we can concurrently and actively perform some of these goals today. We can have some of the small items that we're talking about in the news today, like a small windmill, like some solar panels, small things that incorporate into our overall building, our building platform, so that we can navigate towards a lower emissions and a lower greenhouse gas emissions from a building standpoint, our permanent building, our hangars, the things that we can control right now. And that's not necessarily the airlines, but what the Federal Aviation Administration and the International Civil Aviation Organizations, again, just recently published, does help us navigate towards those goals and help us talk to the largest companies probably in the world to make sure that we are headed down the right path. If you go to the next slide. Again, this is just a quick snapshot of the EPA's US greenhouse gas emissions. And this graph comes from this. This is a massive document. This graph comes from this, and I had both Larry Lackey, who was online today, and myself had the privilege of going to a recent conference just a few weeks ago called Airports Going Green. We had some of the largest airports and the largest leaders at those airports from around the world, from Asia to the Caribbean, and of course some of the major airports in the United States. At that conference, Kevin Welch, who's the executive director of the Office of Environment and Energy with the Federal Aviation Administration, presented some of these pieces. Quick snapshot here. This is 2020 again, just released in April of 2022. This is 2020 US greenhouse gas emissions by sector. Each one of these sectors, of course, is different. 27% comes from the transportation sector. And if you go to the next slide, of that 27%, 8% comes from the aircraft emissions portion, which does equate to about a 2 to 3% greenhouse gas emission from in the United States. This is just the United States, 2 to 3% of overall greenhouse gas emissions. That includes commercial, military, and general aviation administration. Obviously, this is United States. This isn't the Burlington International Airport, but the entire United States. If you go to the next slide. And there are things that we locally can do today. We can push our tenants, and we can ask those questions, ask very similar questions, specifically about sustainable aviation fuels. In fact, if you drive next to Heritage Aviation today, you're going to see under construction a brand new fuel tank to start accommodating some of this sustainable aviation fuel coming to the Burlington Airport. There's massive guidelines, and as the FAA and these federal partners, the U.S. Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, the USDA, and the EPA, created this roadmap to sustainable aviation fuel, which is to achieve 3 billion gallons per year into the aviation sector to reach a 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030, 8 years, and 100% projected aviation sustainable aviation fuel by 2050. And what does that mean? And one of the speakers tonight mentioned this as part of the slides. If you go to the next slide, this is from the Federal Aviation Administration. So there are different sections of the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the aviation specific sector. Everything in the dark blue and the light blue is from the past historical numbers. I think you can imagine what the dip there is because of the global pandemic. There was of course that dip. Red line is showing if we stay on the path that we are today in the aviation industry with no changes, no technology changes, of course we're going to go up. This is that red line right there. There's a small section, new aircraft diffusion trajectory and airline fleet renewal, new aircraft, new technology, new engines that are more efficient in the market. So small reduction there. Even smaller reduction, but still a reduction, is that yellow sliver that's in the middle there. That's operational improvements. Those are approaches and departure procedures coming in and out of airports. In the past, those procedures really were steps. If you imagine a three-dimensional step into the actual runway, now it's more like a slide, more like a slope into the runway. So there's more efficient use of those power settings onto an aircraft. And then overwhelmingly, the green and the light green there, both a 2030 goal and a 2050 goal to reach 100% sustainable aviation fuel by the 2050 market. And this isn't our graph, this is the Federal Aviation Administration, really insightful by Mr. Walsh, again from the FAA. If you go to the next slide, there's international organization also doing the same thing. This is the International Civil Aviation Organization, also reaching what they call the LTAG, or the long-term global aspirational goal for international aviation, or net zero goal by 2050. This map, directly from their website, icao.int, is a map of all countries and or airports in the world that are now using sustainable aviation fuel, both delivering fuel, and then the orange is other delivery methods going into those particular airports. We have a long way to go, specifically in the United States. Very similar graph that the ICAO presents. Again, aircraft technology in the blue, orange is operational improvements on those specific engine types, and then sustainable aviation fuels coming into the market by the 2050 goals, 3 billion gallons per year. If you go to the next slide. And it's happening in Burlington right now. This is a flight on November 12th, just a few days ago. Boeing 737 operated by United Airlines from Newark to Burlington, Vermont, using sustainable aviation fuel. This was actually painted, the aircraft itself using that logo that United uses. So it is happening right now, and we need to be prepared for that from an infrastructure standpoint. We need to make sure that our partners like Heritage Aviation have the ability to stock the fuel and use it with our airline partners. Most of the fuel that's purchased and pumped into the aircraft is not owned by Heritage, it's owned by the airlines. Heritage simply flows through to the actual aircraft itself. So this is great to see that this type of aircraft, this is only a 1-year-old aircraft coming into Burlington, a larger aircraft, more people on board, going to the same destination versus 2 aircraft doing that same flight. Maybe I'll stop here and then, or I can continue going with some of the future projects of the airport.
Good time to ask some questions.
I think so, unless the future includes the emissions.
It doesn't have to, the future is more development and planning.
Yeah, then I would agree that would be great. Well, first I want to thank you and everybody you brought here to come to listen to hard talk directed at you. It's not easy to sit here, and yet, truth be told, we have to do it. I mean, we are getting the big bucks because we believe that we are in positions of authority. And so we got great responsibility to do that. So this is a really hard conversation for everybody. I just want to acknowledge that because this is in public and this is really the start of the conversation. And the reason that we're here is because we need to make systemic changes. You know, I think as I came in, I talked about feeling guilty about driving my car here. It was like 2-something miles, right? But I feel miserable. This is the first meeting that I've driven to instead of taking my bike in like a really long time, right? And I feel bad about that, but the truth of the matter is my riding those 2 miles is not going to be the solution to that. We're going to need to make these big systemic changes. So the first thing that I just want to get clarity about, because I think I hear Donnie particularly speaking about it, is are aviation emissions getting added into the baseline study?
The answer is yes, they are. No, that is that tier 3 or the group 3 emissions that we're talking about, other than what they classify, other than the airport operated or owned aircraft.
Yeah,
Of course, we don't own
that
any.
tier 3, that's scope 3.
Scope.
And could you just talk about the timing and the process? So I understand what the differences are between a scope 1, a scope 2, a scope 3, that kind of thing. So it's, yeah, like we know that it's gonna happen like soon as opposed to like.
Gotcha. That's fine. Do you mind if you go back to the one slide with the big chart on the right hand side there? So we've been working over the last many months of not just get a little bit further, not just providing and investigating and learning what this one right here. Yeah, this one. What we are using today, right? Our scope 1 processes, not including the aircraft of scope 1, because that's airport operated aircraft. We don't operate any aircraft, but any ground support equipment that we use, any construction and waste recycling. So we're collecting that data. How much electricity do we use? How much water do we use? How much food waste leaves the airport? Those are the things that we need to understand so that we can, because it's not always just about the greenhouse gas emissions. We need to construct better, and I'll get into this later. But we've already instituted policies to make sure that the embodied carbon within our construction footprint, meaning the cost or the greenhouse gas emissions from actually building a building or making concrete, making glass and windows, is as reduced as possible when we do talk about the future of BTB. Same with electric use and water usage. How can we use things different? In fact, we're now collecting our rainwater from some of our roofs and using it to wash our vehicles and water our plants versus letting it just go into the runoff. So we are making those procedural policy changes. And then directly to your question, all the way down to scope 3, which includes all tenant or other aircraft, airlines, military, and any other commercial corporate aircraft operations in and out of the Burlington airport. And we are busy. We're a very busy airport. In fact, we are the busiest airport in the Northeast outside of Boston right now. That includes Providence, Manchester, Bangor, Portland, Maine, Bradley International Airport, and Manchester, if I didn't say that already. We're also greater than many over 1 million populated areas such as Milwaukee and Providence, as I already mentioned. So we are busy, and that busy meaning aircraft operations are busy, not enplaning passengers, but our actual aircraft operations, landing and takeoff. And that's what's being studied and inventoried as part of this GHG.
So in terms of the timing of that, so that can be shared with the public, what are we looking at
my hope is that we can wrap most of this up at least by the end of Q1 of calendar year next year. So let's around March of 2023.
So that if we had our last meeting of this committee in the city council term, the last Tuesday of March of 2023, you would be able to come back with a report that would at least have something meaningful as opposed to, yeah, we're still working on it.
Yeah, I want to say yes. I want to commit right now, but I also want to make sure that my team is prepared for that as well. So my hope and my guidance to our team, both consultant team and internal team, is to really wrap this up by Q1.
I'll make that request of the committee, but I'd like to say that I would like that. I was actually hoping that it'd be February, but you know, I understand how stuff happens, and if it can happen earlier, then that would be good. I think it's important for this committee in this term to hear that. The process, I don't want to monopolize this, so I just I guess that what there are two other sort of big things that are I'm thinking about. I'm very happy that you're seeking the accreditation. I'd love to hear that report at the same time. I think that Mr. Porter's comments about the things that need to be like looked at in that, and it's one of the helpful things of having something in writing, should be looked at and commented about that. It's not clear, so I just ask if there is a goal that you have of actually hitting the level 6 or the step lift, the 6 or whatever that is called, the transition, you know, to being able to hit all those, so that is actually a goal, an articulated goal of the Burlington International Airport to get accreditation at level 6. Is that something that you are striving for?
Ultimately, absolutely. Yeah, each one of these, the mapping, which of course we're doing right now, the reduction, the optimization, neutrality, and then those transformation and transition, which is really when we start requiring and incorporating all of our partners at the airport to join us.
So it would be really helpful, I think, in March, but as life goes on, to understand sort of the hope for timelines, the, you know, maybe the can be, you know, like the realistic timelines, you know, because like all construction projects, things always take longer than you'd like them and that you plan for. But I think that as part of the report, it would be helpful to understand the thinking about when you're reaching things, because as you heard in the public comment, as you've heard me rant on, you know, we don't have a lot of time. So we got to do stuff expeditiously. We got to do stuff boldly. And I guess that the last thing relates to, and maybe this is a question for Donnie, about how we, you know, we talked about small changes, but like in this process, how do you make big goals and big targets? You know, what do we, I don't know, maybe I'm not being articulate, but I'm going to just leave it at that. How do we do that in your mind?
To make the
real big thing. You know, you talked about we're going to make these small things.
Yeah.
We need to make the small things. They're necessary. They are woefully insufficient. So how do we do the big stuff?
I think first and foremost in now, especially because there are some funding opportunities that we have available today, including $1 million that is set aside as part of our the bilateral infrastructure bill and the big bills. $1 million is incorporated into our sustainability plan for constructing big things, whether that's geothermal to support our terminal building or additional solar and other things so that we can be self-sufficient within our, at least some of our biggest buildings that we own and operate. To me, that can happen now. That can make sure that we have it now inclusive of those policies that I mentioned, making sure that airlines are using electricity from our jet bridges versus running auxiliary power, so more fuel powered engines on board. Those to me are the biggest things that happen now, we can control now, and incorporate into our future new construction. How do we make sure that we're building sustainably?
I actually misspoke. I have one more thing, which is there is this dynamic tension between reduction of flights and non-growth, degrowth, whatever you want to call it, and trying to do the sustainable fuels, etc. And I believe, and I would like to know if you are sort of really grappling with that question and studying that, because the truth is, I mean, the numbers may be that that we have to reduce, and the only way we're sort of gonna like be able to measure everything up, right? The phrase is escaping me, but I think you know what I'm saying, where I'm going with this, is to actually confront that question head on and study it and make some analysis of it. And so I hear folks who are very compelling to me say we need to reduce. And I see these graphs and I go, we're going to reduce by doing the sustainable fuel and we're going to do all this other stuff. And that is a conversation that we all, with you at the point, need to take on head on and have that integrated in, because otherwise we're sort of talking past each other. So
I appreciate how you described it, because it is and I appreciate how Dan described it as well. It is a unbelievably large challenge for an airport and an airport sponsor, the city of Burlington, to require or reduce the number of flights. In fact, that might be some violation of grant assurances by the FAA saying you can't do that. You can't limit the number of flights. You can't limit the number of flights on specific time of day. You can't limit the entities flying into and out of a public use airport. So I really appreciate how you phrase that, because it is something that we need to look at creatively. How can we do that? Is there a solution to that, or is that solution in the technology that's available within those flights, whether it's the physical technology on the aircraft or the fueling systems that go on board, or even better, electric aviation, and partnering with folks like Beta Technologies to make sure that their growth here in Burlington is incorporated into our future plans.
we need, and I'll end with this, we need to be able to line all these things up. And if the FAA is a problem that we cannot by ourselves deal with, we need to at least identify it. And then we need to turn to the people who are in charge of the FAA and their masters in Congress and the president and say, you've got to fix this because it's unacceptable. It's sort of like the way we have to deal with taxation or other problems here in the state, where the state limits us to be able to do hardly anything, and we got to fight with them, and we have to do charter changes, etc. So never should we allow ourselves not to understand the impediments and go after them, even knowing that if that's all we do, then we're not doing enough. So, but I mean, I appreciate that, and I'm hoping that your studying will really take this into account and analyze this, because again, it may be that, you know, that is the solution that you've got to come to, and we should all be on that same page if the science dictates that. And I'm sorry if I've taken too much time.
No, and you underscore what I also believe now, is that this is the beginning of a conversation, and we will have you back in March if you're ready to come back to us then. But I also wonder if it isn't a topic for a special meeting, just these topics.
Sure.
Potentially. But I do have 3 questions that, and in the interest of also keeping our meeting moving, I do have 3 questions. One is, what level is there? Do you know what level of aircraft carbon accreditation you're seeking right now?
And right now, as part of this plan, it's level 1, it's the mapping level, it's to make, because you have to get them in order, right? So we need to get that accreditation on level 1. What are we seeking in the long term? I agree with Mr. Porter. We should be seeking level 4 accreditation. We need to go through this one, or level 6 accreditation. Level 4 is really the kind of culmination of those particular. Yeah, we should be seeking level 6. But it is going to take time, and it is going to go through that accreditation process, making sure that we're, of course, following the outlines set by the Airport Council International. I can tell you right now, in the world, there are only 22 airports that are level 5 accredited, which is the transportation accreditation. In the world, there are only 26 airports that have the level 6 accreditation. And level 4, and this is all available online on the ACI or Airport Carbon Accreditation.org. In the world, there are 49 participants that achieve the level 4 accreditation. So this is not an easy process. It's very challenging, which should be, right? It should be challenging to airports to make sure that we hit those areas.
I like that there is a uniform standard that airports can strive for, and everyone's talking the same language and meeting the same standards. So
this conference that Larry and I just got back from was really eye-opening to the global conversation happening for airports. I can't remember who mentioned it, but there are massive infrastructure improvements at terminal buildings, specifically around this country. And there should be that, there should and is and will be that conversation in Burlington about how to build better for each one of these.
my next question is around the coordination with Vermont Air National Guard. Obviously, they're one of the larger tenants at the airport. And how do you interact with them and get them to come along on this journey?
Yeah, I think there's many options for us, whether we're talking about again, globally or airport-wide requirements as part of lease transitions or lease changes, and that should be part of the conversation, and or requirements as part of those lease negotiations. We have a fantastic relationship with all of our tenants, including the Vermont Air National Guard, and they are also doing things today that are mostly related to their infrastructure.
But outside of having to renegotiate a lease, do you have a willing partner? Do you have people you liaise with that you can have these conversations?
The wing commander is very in tune with the conversation that we're having both within the city regionally and certainly right at the airport. They are already moving forward with these infrastructure goals. They have the largest solar field on the airport today. That's only half completed. We've already had these conversations of please complete that solar panel project. Please add into the grid. And there's those conversations that happen every single time.
And the intention in this assessment, the mapping, phase 1 is to also to map and assess all of the emissions associated with the area. Okay, good. And then my other question is about regional coordination with other airports. I've traded mails with Dan about this. It seems like, and I said this to Jim last night, if I have to go to Denver on business, I'm going to try to fly out of Burlington. But if I can't fly out of Burlington, I'll drive to Albany or Manchester because I need to be in Denver. So I do believe that if we were the only airport in the region and we reduced our flights, we could actually have that impact, but the reality is there are supply of flights elsewhere. And so it seems to me, is a practical consideration. This has to be a regional conversation minimally.
Yeah.
If we're going to look at trying to get efficiencies out of the air traveling public.
That's right.
You know, and also we talk about reducing flights, and as I think about it more, it doesn't seem like it necessarily needs to mean we fly less people. It just means we fly the same amount of people on fewer airplanes that are more fuel efficient, even potentially to get some of that.
Yeah.
That reduction. And so could you speak a little bit about the coordination and the forums that you use to coordinate these sorts of activities with other airports?
Yeah. So specifically with other airports, you're exactly right. Within right now, today, really, I think our last report was 2020, but within a 2.5 hour radius of our airport, there's about 2.5 million people flying. Obviously, that's not out of the Burlington International Airport. So we do see and analyze where people are driving to fly. So there are advantages to a regional airport coordination of the demand of air travel out of this region, whether it's northern Vermont, New York, or New England, or beyond. There are benefits to that. It's highly competitive as well. We still are competing with some of that air service from Portland, Maine to Bradley to Manchester, Albany, even New York City. We have people that drive, and of course north of the border. Every time we have conversations with the airlines specifically, the biggest requests that we ask for, not just from a sustainability standpoint, but from an efficiency of a passenger, but from the efficiency of that. So many other benefits associated with larger aircraft, commercial aircraft flying out of the airport. That's what's known as mainline air service. Not every aircraft that flying out of the Burlington airport, in fact, most of the aircraft are not owned, operated, or flown with employees of United Airlines, American Airlines, and these are small subsidiary companies that are using the corporate logos of these big carriers, regional carriers. So asking those airlines, one, to bring in larger service. That Boeing 737 in the example is a prime example of a larger plane, twice, sometimes 3 times the capacity on a single flight going to Newark, New Jersey, and typically back again. 3 times the amount of people that fit on that plane instead of 3 flights going to that plane. And the planes are full. So I think there's great collaboration regionally at the airport level as well as with our partners to reduce the number of flights with great benefits and efficiency.
Thank you. Should we, if you have no further questions, we can move on to the last part of the presentation. I will do a little bit of timekeeping right now. We're at 6:30. I'm knowing that we're going to be having another opportunity to take this. I may go take this up. I may not have the second public forum tonight, so we can get on to the other items.
Could we just ask a couple questions?
Rather
than make another presentation, I just would like to.
Right now, I want to finish the presentation that we have. And then perhaps we could, maybe you could submit them.
He doesn't answer questions.
Well, maybe you can submit them.
The place to ask them is here.
Sure that they do, but I want to we need to keep the meeting moving as well. So if you can continue with the presentation.
All right, if we go to, I think it's page 18. Couple more, one more. So I'm going to hand it over to Shelby to kick off this conversation.
Great. So when we're talking about the future of ETV, we've been working on this for quite some time. So with all of the improvements at the airport, a piece of that is traditionally some landscape improvements. So what we've done is we've moved forward with developing a landscape master plan concept. And that is that we do a large version of all of these small pieces that we would with time, but do them in advance. And working with the city of South Burlington to almost receive credit for a landscape master plan. And our vision currently, which we have started to work with some folks in the city of South Burlington on, is really utilizing green space that is across the street from the airport. And in that green space, it will involve accessible trails, rest areas, so picnic areas, benches, things of that kind. But really focusing on this being a neighborhood community effort. So that includes public interaction and really neighborhood connection and really finding out what those folks are interested in. Next slide. This is one of the ideas and kind of sketches that came from the plan that we initially had, working with Nature-Based Climate Solutions Organization, community garden concepts. Just last week, South Burlington Parks and Rec, Burlington Parks and Rec, the Intervale, Winooski Valley Park District all got together and really were brainstorming of what we can do with these areas to be a community effort. The two images on the right are from the Winooski Valley Park District, and we have a big focus on accessibility to be really inclusive with the neighborhood. And that was just an example that we had kind of spoken to conceptually again about accessible gardening. These are just examples of kind of the direction that we are leading this charge in, hoping to elaborate on as we develop.
I think a really important keyword in this slide particularly is the word concept. These are concepts. These are, and this goes to the question of what is happening across the street. Where is there? What can happen across the street? And concept in my mind is not the final solution. Over the next couple of months, we will be having a public outreach session to encourage communication from our neighbors. Is this what is wanted across the street? Would folks take advantage of community gardenings across the street and pathways of multi-use bike paths connected to the South Burlington Park and Rec system? So these are concepts, and like Shelby said, this is a credit program. There are requirements as we build and as we develop. There are requirements. A certain amount of that build or percentage needs to go towards landscaping. Well, where we build cannot always go on landscaping, a parcel that we're talking about. So the concept of a credit is working with the city of South Burlington to say, can we build something like this today? Even though we're not building anything just yet at the airport, besides some of the things that we've already landscaped. Can we build this today and receive credit over time for future build out that occurs over the next 5 or 10 years? These concepts will cost over $1 million to fund. So there's some great benefit to making sure that there's an ability to do something today. Encourage the use of the property across the land, like Shelby said, whether it's walking, biking. Go to the next slide. Is it that mouse that you need to use?
No.
No, it's just.
Oh, could you present?
Is there a limit for a question? I'm not sure if you're aware, but there is a housing crisis, and parks are lovely, public gardens are lovely. There are 44 acres though that could be used for housing if the F-35s were to go. Putting that out there. Housing crisis, 44 acres. But that property right there could be housing right now.
I'd like to just continue, for us to be able to continue this presentation with three other items on the agenda. If there are additional questions and submit them to Councilor Bergen and myself, we will get those answered. So be sure about that.
Let's go on.
So the final piece of this is, I just wanted to orient the location that we're talking about. This is the greens, this is our terminal building. This is Williston Road over here and Airport Drive, and then most of this green space right here. And if you click on the next slide. Actually, go back one slide so I can pinpoint this location as well. This is the corner of Airport Parkway and Kirby Road, which the next slide now zooms into. We had a lot of conversations specifically about this area. Recently, I did request a rezoning of this particular parcel over on this side and then over here. We're not rezoning this, and there are other opportunities. The reason for the rezone, if you click to the next slide, during our master planning process, we found that a new maintenance and snow removal equipment building would fit fantastic for the operational needs of the airport. Again, Kirby Road and Airport Parkway with a snow removal building connected to our taxiway system, essential to connecting this. In fact, we spent hours with Mr. Lees talking about opportunities on other locations in person together, talking about this. As well as additional, what would be called the de-icing pad or additional holding bays associated with the taxiway. If you click one more slide, so if I take this master plan picture away, we have located alternative options for our maintenance facility. And if you click to the next slide, we can and are now designing a new maintenance facility further to the north. We are not designing anything in this area. In fact, like Shelby mentioned earlier with the landscaping plan, we're going to incorporate additional property and additional landscaping onto these particular parcels and still accomplish the goals of the airport to make sure that we can still have a maintenance facility in that area. This is under design right now. It is partially funded. We're working with the FAA to want to design it, and then further funding will come most likely next year or the year after to complete this building. This is also adjacent to commercial industrial properties over here, as well as a sewage receiving station up to the north. And I believe that, and these are pictures of what we're projecting into the future. This orange facility right here is what we recently opened. This is our consolidated security checkpoint. This is open right now, with the first floor being the checkpoint and the second floor being an additional new holding area or passenger area to wait for your plane. We are designing this north project, the north terminal improvement, today, right now. This is part of an earmark, a $35 million earmark. Thank you to Senator Leahy and his team to remove a portion and replace it to create operational efficiencies, safety requirements, and really move away from our taxi system, other federal requirements associated with that relocation. This one, we're competing nationally with additional funding, most likely an additional $35 million to, again, relocate our existing terminal. This would be removed and then rebuilt over into this side to accomplish greater efficiencies at the airport. And if you go to the next two slides are just viewpoints of this from the airfield side as well as from this neighborhood side. And I believe that is my final slide. One thing I wanted to talk about is as we build, and I touch base on this many times, these are the policy changes and the conversations we're having internally. As we build the new terminal, as we build the maintenance facility, what can we do differently? Not just from an electrification standpoint, but the embodied carbon, can we purchase something differently or use something different? In fact, we've explored and talked to other airports specifically about new apron spaces using glass instead of typical aggregate, recycled glass. new and tentative tenant incentives, not just requirements as part of the lease, but can there be new tenant incentives to make sure that we're hitting the some of these goals into the future? And of course, some of the policy changes that I mentioned. Now I believe that's my last slide. There is many other slides after this, but they're more just for information and if there were any questions associated with what we're doing.
This presentation is updated for the one we received.
Correct. I think there was
We can add.
VHB slides are now in there, and then I think we changed around this.
And this one is now attached to our agenda, this updated presentation. We don't have questions.
I have 3 comments in terms of the development or expansion. As this first comment is, I want to see no further harm to that neighborhood. The second one is, I believe there needs to be a meeting with the neighbors around the new maintenance building. And third is that I would like to see a report back on the community engagement of that building, as well as any of the other things that you're talking about doing at that March meeting.
And so is there community engagement plan with the neighborhood?
There is. Right now, we're working with consultants and other project leads like the Winooski Valley Park District, Intervale, climate-based solutions, including the folks that designed the Champlain Elementary School. We as department heads were able to tour that school a little while ago, and a lot of these concepts came from that tour. And there are some conversations happening with a few neighbors over in that area, specifically some of the neighbors that were part of the rezoning conversations as part of that.
I'm not part of that conversation, I'm a neighbor.
Not all the neighbors, but what I was saying was the subcommittee leadership of that rezoning task force. But there is going to be open public meetings that we, of course, would invite the neighbors, your tenants, that were in that picture.
That's what I understand community engagement to me. That's my definition of community engagement.
So yes, I would just echo that any community engagement should be as widely advertised and open as possible. Because we're an hour and 40 minutes on this topic, which is more than we normally give to any one topic at this committee, and we know we have plenty of other discussion. We have more discussion to do on this, and we're going to do it. We're going to ask you to come back in March and give us an update on this. We'll have another opportunity to talk on that. For those listening and those in the room, if you have additional comments or questions, please submit them to Councilor Bergman and myself, and we will get them answered and get them processed, either get additional information or make sure that that's also queued up for you to respond to. And so I would like to close this item and move on to GMT proposed FY24 budget and regional funding. Thank you, Laura. Who's want me to take it?
I can give a brief opening. Really appreciate Nick Foss coming from GMT and Tom Darenthal, one of my co-commissioners on the commission. Thanks to Councilor Bergman's leadership, we've been looking at a lot of regional funding issues at this committee, and at the same time trying to put together the foundations for FY24 budget. At the last commission meeting, we started talking about the draft FY24 budget, at least from the kind of building block elements of the assessments and fair strategy. And it seemed apparent that we needed to bring this conversation to this committee because one, with the reduction in the COVID funds, we are facing a situation where GMT is proposing to reinstate fares as of the beginning of FY23 and increase Burlington's assessment by 11.6% to pay for ADA operational increases, etc. Nick has been great at providing information and data, so he's got that here. And just really wanted to get the committee's engagement in this as we're moving forward.
Great, so yeah, thank you again, Nick, GMT and the Director of Finance over there. I recently presented the proposed 24 assessments. We don't have our operating budget yet. That'll be brought before the Finance Committee next month, hopefully to the board as well for approval. But I have provided, we try to at least get a draft assessment out to our local urban members so that they have a sense of what to expect, as well as their budget timelines a little bit more occurred a little bit earlier in the process than ours. So being able to get that information out to them is helpful. So at the recent Finance Committee, we did present the proposed assessments. The Finance Committee did recommend approving them. The board did as well, with the caveat that the fixed route assessment was only endorsed because if for some reason the budget comes out, and I mean, I don't foresee this at the moment, and there were shortfalls, that fixed route assessment could change later in the process. Looking at Burlington's assessment, and over the last 4 years, which I've been with GMT, the real volatility in the assessments have come from the ADA. Fixed route has been a pretty regular 4% increase each year. And with ADA being based on the ride count of the members, you can see a tremendous amount of volatility based on your assessment. And that's exactly what occurred with Burlington this year. So obviously last fiscal year, we were working with FY21 ride numbers. Burlington made up a much smaller share of the overall ride count for ADA. Actually, maybe I should start with how you calculate the assessment. So with ADA, what we do contract that service to SSTA, is we come up with an internal estimate of what we believe the program is going to cost. And then from there, we take the most recent completed fiscal year's ride count and then allocate that out among all the members. So last year, I think Burlington represented about 27% of the overall rides. That grew this fiscal year into about close to 38% of the rides. And so obviously that Burlington's assessment was going to be much larger. And then compound that with the fact that we've seen pretty incredible increases with our contractor, SSTA. They're dealing with the same cost pressures we're dealing with labor as well as fuel. And so when I first arrived at GMT, I think we were paying them around, in the mid 50s per revenue hour. We operate off of a transit rate, is how we kind of pay them. And so this fiscal year for FY24, we're projecting that to go to about $72.50. The year before that, when we were doing the FY23 assessments, we were basing off a $65 service. So just to give you an idea of the growth and the cost of that program. Now we are trying to find some ways, both in the assessment methodology of how we come up with allocating those costs, as well as some possible cost savings with SSTA. But the assessment certainly has made it very difficult for municipalities. Last year it was TEUC that had the big hit. This year it appears that it's Burlington. And so we did contract out a study to be done with Steve Falvey or Seven Hill. We presented that study back in June. I believe we'll be visiting that, especially this fiscal year volatility we've seen. So we are working on that assessment. We do realize that it is certainly difficult for municipalities in terms of the wide swings that can occur. But unfortunately, there's going to be winners and losers no matter how you kind of carve that up. So we're going to work with the committee and the board and try to see if we can find a happy that lowers the volatility, but also makes it a very safe or a very fair methodology. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I would say this year, just to summarize the assessments, and I did send an email to your chief administrative officer last week highlighting the assessments. But you're looking at about $192,000 increase year over year from FY 23. 56% of that is from ADA, 26% is fixed through, and then the remainder is basically Call Street shuttle capitals. And, we do a $75,000 capital assessment. There was some cost pressure there this year for everyone because we did increase the capital assessment. It was for many, many years, $50,000. We're projecting our capital costs to go up. We recently put out our 5-year capital plan. So our capital costs are increasing in the next 5 years. So we thought a $25,000 increase there was optimal. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I do have a presentation that I provided the finance committee that I can hand out to everyone for if they want to take a look at that. So
I am curious in terms of the ADA increases. Is that the number? I mean, you talked about the methodology, and I guess it's the cost, just like labor and sort of other gas and what have you. But is this also an increase in the numbers of people? And so the numbers of people, and is it also the nature of their trips? I have you studied like why this is, who this is, what this says about the demographics of our city, and the, you know, and also the transportation related nature of the way we've developed as a city. You know, like if somebody can get to the pharmacy and the pharmacy is like 3 doors down or 5 doors down, you don't need you might not need SSTA, right? But
sure. So we do know ride count is up. We do know that ADA has recovered much quicker than both the fixed through and some of our other demand response programs. In terms of the cost, we do know that, you know, obviously we're in an inflationary environment, so those weren't exactly unexpected. Part of the other issue was that SSTA has multiple programs under their umbrella, and one of those programs, there's a Medicaid program that GNT is also a part of, has not recovered, right? So the overhead of SSTA, the fixed costs, were really shifted to their other programs, specifically ADA, because it's the largest share. So that was a big hit as well, because obviously even if you're doing less rides, you know, you still have an administrative staff and a tremendous amount of overhead that needs to be paid for. And you know, I believe pre-pandemic Medicaid was representing about 50 to 60% of rides. Now it's down in the 30s. So that certainly affected both the transit rate and ADA's, you know, kind of share.
so that reduction means that the income that would come from the state Medicaid program is reduced as well.
Correct. Yeah. And you're only saving on the variable cost, right? So there's much like our cost structure, we're, you know, about, I'd say 55% fixed costs. I would assume SSTA is about that as well. So you know, we really only save the variable costs, and those fixed costs are not having to be paid for by the programs. But back to the, you know, trips, yes, ADA has fully recovered. It's actually grown over its pre-pandemic numbers. So that certainly hasn't exactly been helpful costing.
If the Medicare or Medicaid portion of that had recovered.
Well, the transit rate would certainly be down. You know, if they do more rides, they get more efficient. But with telehealth, that's really been a huge driver of why we're seeing lower numbers.
But this means that there's the other aspects of our elderly transportation system need to be looked at. I have no other questions on that. My just to lay it out, my big question is the big funding question and the role that the city can play in that, as well as local match ideas and what it's going to take to keep fare free in Burlington. So those are the big things.
Start off with that, which is that in conversation with you and other members of the board, it seems to me, in talking to Catherine Schad, the CAO, that the city is prepared to move forward with this increase and to pay this 11.6% increase. On top of that, as we discussed, the city loop, which through the North Winooski Avenue, we've committed to making fare free. That'll add another $50,000 or so onto our assessment. My thought is that we go to the board meeting in December, which is where assessments will get approved, that the city of Burlington could request that the motion to approve the assessments include two recommendations. One, to initiate a reform of the ADA assessment to remove some of the volatility that Nick was talking about, and two, to recommit our organization from a board level and a leadership level to advancing state and regional funding. We can't do it alone. It's going to need to be PTA. It's going to need other partners, but at least to have the city be on record saying, okay, we're going to pay this increase, but we have an unsustainable funding system. We need to change the funding system, and to mark, through that motion, our desired approach moving forward.
If I may, I think that this committee should ask our city's legislators to be acting in regard to funding, and we should also be acting, our council as a full body, to do the same, and to also not just reach out at the city, to not just reach out to City of Burlington legislators, but to reach out to all the legislators of the member communities, and try to create the movement that we need to publicly fund this, because austerity is killing it and it sucks. That's in the reporting, which I'm just very happy to get there. So, and I think that the whereas clauses, I don't know whether staff has the bandwidth to draft. If staff doesn't have bandwidth, I can assist with that. Or the committee. I don't know. Well, I can't volunteer anybody else. I volunteer myself to do that. But I do think that there is a lot in the funding study that can act as the whereas clauses. And just to lay it on the table, I happen to believe that the utility fee is the most sensible one. I mean, the other ones are fraught. That is fraught as well. But I would love for the city to get behind that and say that we think it's a good idea. The politics of that, I just sort of, I say this just to begin that conversation. But if the board, if there were other people who were weighing in on the source of that funding, I'd be happy to join in that. But I think we are not acting fast enough on this particular political action. That's just like throw it out on the table.
I'll come back to those points in a moment. I just had a couple of clarifying questions around the increases. So that the increases are based on last year or pre-COVID or?
So, yeah, I mean, the increases that I just walked you through are over FY23 assessments that we provided. Or I should say that.
Okay, and the $192,000 increase, that assumes fare free is retiring?
Retiring.
Okay, except for City Loop, which would add 50,000 onto that 192.
And the College Street shuttle, for that portion in Burlington is fare free.
Now, I will start.
Sorry, the money you just mentioned does include the College Street shuttle, right?
It does.
No.
The base assessment.
Right, the base assessment includes College Street free. And if you want something else free, there's an additional.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I should say, last year when we provided, because typically the process is we put a approved budget, out, and then because so much of our funding is dependent on really our state partner, E-Trans, getting to a state grant application, we had fares in the 23 approved budget and those were pulled out in the adjusted budget. So I don't know if this will be a legislative priority in 24. You know, there's always the chance that the legislature comes in with funding to remain fare free, and the city of Burlington would have to come up with that additional cost. So we'll just put that out there. Things change pretty drastically every year from our approved budget to our adjusted budget based on, you know, how much funding we get from the state.
Okay, thanks. Excuse me. And we had talked about trying to lobby our legislative partners to make this a priority, and we do have a breakfast scheduled for December 8th.
Yeah,
We do have a city council meeting on December 5th. And so if we could queue something up here December 5th, we could put that problem on December 8th, if we could pass through the full council, and I would be supportive of that, assuming we could have a resolution authored by Tuesday of next week, right? Which,
or at least to put it on the list, we probably can squeeze out till Thursday.
yeah, let's get it onto the list. So is that what you were
Yeah, I mean, I think also in light of public forum comments about local match and federal funding, that I mean, that we should be teeing that up, so to speak. And it would be great to have some sense, whether it's in the resolution or it is sort of as a follow-up of the cost for getting the head times in, I think that's the term, right? Headways. Decreased in Burlington, sort of, you know, and the use of federal funds, those infrastructure funds, and the use of local matches to do that. At the end of the day, I rode my bike, part because the ability to get here from, you know, Roosevelt Park, Boys and Girls Club is not really great. I need to get here, so or my car, like here. So we need, you know, the system we need to build.
Do we need a formal resolution or a formal motion to do this, or to certainly to sponsor it?
How about I move that we ask staff to draft a resolution that we can bring to the council for the meeting on the 5th, as you had indicated. How was that?
If that is something the staff can handle between now and.
I mean, I think ultimately, yes, I think ultimately we can start something, but I think Gene has in his head probably a lot more detail about where he wants this to go. And ultimately, if the motion hasn't been reviewed by this committee, I think it could still be sponsored by the members of the committee. It just wouldn't be approved by the committee, the motion or the resolution.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, I think that what I'm looking for is something that deals with the big funding question. I think that looking for something that deals with the, you know, accessing federal funds that have become available and local match ideas, if there are some that can be in there, but other than that, those who, and keeping fare free, which you've got, you know, so it's sort of integrated into what you're doing already, and the looking to the big funding report to give the sort of the facts on it. So it's not really you know, creating whereas is out of whole cloth. It's like, okay, there was this report and this analysis that's there. If I were writing it, I'd like be trying to crib that stuff, right? Because already written, already analyzed, you know what I mean? So
staff will take an initial run, and then Gene, I think, would welcome your.
I'd be happy to take to look at that in general
leadership on that.
So With that, I will second that
There we go.
intention and offer my assistance as well.
Okay.
Great, that's very important. Persistence.
All those in favor?
All over Garrett.
So my understanding is that that was just a recommendation that staff work on a draft. It's not a formal motion, or if it is a formal.
It was important.
What is the motion?
I think the motion is to ask staff to work on a resolution that has those components that
Okay,
I mentioned.
you've got that
as
as a minutes. Great, thank you.
And then the committees will,
Great.
will work on it.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just a sort of on the side. You mentioned this December 8th breakfast. Is this with the council and the legislature?
Legislators, Burlington legislative delegation.
Is this open to the public?
Sure. We can find out.
I mean, I'm happy to have you attend if you're interested.
I am interested.
Yeah,
Okay.
then let's
Is-
get the information. I've asked the mayor's administration to add regional transit funding to the agenda already for that meeting, because I knew this was a priority among us. So, I'll make sure you get the invite.
Thank you.
There's also a, just as an aside, so that we just passed it, last night, Charlie Baker from Regional Planning came and said that he's having I think it's a different legislative thing, and breakfast, and I asked him to raise funding as well. So the extent to which we can continue to work on this.
This is the time of year to hit them up before they get into session.
Yep.
And I'm sure you've heard this before, but there's just a lot of people there. I mean, I think a third of the House and the Senate each are.
Opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point.
Anything else on this item?
Yeah.
Thanks for your patience.
No, happy to be here. You folks are our largest member. You know, you're about 53% of the total local funding on the urban side. So you know, we appreciate Burlington's support. You know, DMT would not exist without it. So thank you.
Good. Well, then I'll close out that item. And we'll move on to the CSWD drop-off center strategy, which
Let's do.
lost Lee, haven't
We did. I sent Lee home. He's had a long day here, so I would represent.
I am. Be a little better.
Yeah. So fundamentally, what we have in the memo, and my apologies, I don't know why I was late to the packet. So in essence, the city of Burlington is going to be seeking a 6-month extension. Current MOU with CSWD on our option to buy 195-201. There is interest in apparent alignment between our two organizations. For an outright purchase of that property. Instead of what was originally contemplated was a 20-year lease purchase arrangement. And there are a number of benefits listed in the memo of an outright purchase, one of which is that we can move immediately toward relocating our soil management activities, which will be impacted by the Rail Yard Enterprise project and other things. So we are working both with the CSWD committees and boards, as well as with us. And we're seeking to go to the council and Board of Finance in December with an actual ask to extend the MOU to give us 6 to 8 months to negotiate a purchase consent. So I feel like it is a move forward. Unfortunately, the location of whether the drop-off center is at Flynn or at Pine is still undetermined because of whether the RDP needs all of the land at 339 Pine, but fundamentally Burlington deserves a modern drop-off center. And we need to figure out where to locate it. We've been playing a little bit of a game of waiting, and it's time for action from staff's perspective. And this lays out a proposed path to give us time to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement for that Flint Avenue property. Happy to answer any questions. Gene, when I just
Flynn
summarize,
Avenue is what we're looking at, right?
to purchase.
Yeah.
That would give us either the chance to locate a drop-off center at Flynn Avenue or 339 Pine. And that we could move our soil storage to Flynn Avenue. One of the things we'll need to do is embark on a public engagement process for the soil storage, as we've heard some complaints about the drop-off center at Flynn Avenue. So I would expect we hear some potential concerns about soil storage.
Sure. I'm in favor of buying that land. I want to use it for a municipal solid waste facility, so.
And it allows that flexibility in the future as well. Is there any additional costs associated with this? And so what might that be?
One is the purchase price. It is going to be certain it's going to be north of $500,000. It's 3 acres of property, zoned industrial. It was in the option to purchase at $500,000, but since the option was signed, the CSWD board believes it's vastly under appraised, and therefore they argue it needs a higher sale price. Our argument is that you're into solid waste management, you're serving the municipalities, you purchased this 20 years ago, you should get your hard costs back, but you should not be making a profit at Burlington's expense.
Right on.
And so we need time for those negotiations to occur. And this MOU expires at the end of the calendar year.
So without extending it, we would lose all of it.
We'd lose the option. They could continue to honor it, but they also would be free to sell the property on the open market.
Do you need a motion to approve
it's listed
as like a sponsor of this, or to recommend?
Right. I think what would be favorable is, yes, if there was a motion to support extending the is it MOU or MOU for another 6 months and recommend the council approval.
I would move that.
And I'll second that. All those in favor?
Me.
Me too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna get that.
We're getting faster tonight. Well. What happens? And the last item we have on our little bit of agenda here is the boundary line adjustments for the Pearl and Prospect intersection. Nobody else.
Well, that's just because all the property owners don't have a clue as to what's going on. I don't know.
Where this is UVM does. It's
New Associate Public Works Engineer Dora Mead.
Well,
This is her first experience with the Transportation and Police Committee.
Hopefully it was gonna be very sleepy, but that's not very.
It's not, it's sleepier usually than that district. So, or wonkier.
It's a good learning opportunity.
Thank you for letting me present and discuss this important issue. So this has to do with the intersection of Pearl and Prospect. The intersection is the busy one. We know this intersection well. And essentially, the state has determined that this is what's known as an HCL, or a high crash location. The state, and the data that we have shows it's the 25th worst intersection in the state of Vermont. And
20 months around.
I know. The state, we just got notification earlier this week, and Laura Wheelock is with me here as well. Promote her to, yeah, that's great. Hi, Laura. Okay, so we just got notification that the state, through their Vermont Project Selection and Prioritization Program, selected this intersection for capital programming and funding. Project was selected under their Traffic Safety Transportation Program. So that means that it's going to be paid for 100% by state and federal funds, which is a good thing. And so what we like to do starting next year is get a designer on board, and then hopefully have some kind of options that we'll be able to review through usual committees and the usual ways that we do those things, and then start working on the design by FY24. In order to do that, we need to go through the process of adjusting some boundary lines, which we signed non-binding to last year, University of Vermont.
And I have a bunch of documents in there that go through that. This is not binding MOU. It's a non-binding MOU because there are several approvals we have to go through. Couldn't just sign an MOU. And we do have a land surveyor that has provided us with 2 separate plats. Because it's 2 different boundary line adjustments, they have to be considered separately. That's why we do that. But essentially, this is informational only right now. Our next steps will be to bring this to Board of Finance and ultimately City Council for their review and approval. But this is just kind of get that information out there, let them know that we're making progress.
Is it clear what adjustments to what lines? Is it on there?
It's on these 2, it's on the black and white, not on that. Yeah, it is a very tricky intersection. Parcel,
Okay.
the dotted dash, and then it's Grocery. To go over here, I'm sorry. Yes, so right here goes this triangle, which is in front of the Grocery.
Oh, okay, just the triangle.
Yeah, and then in return, we're giving this to UVM because their building is in our right of way. It's their current. Yeah,
How do they do that?
as you can see, the
Build
boundary
first, ask later.
right. The boundary lines as they exist go right through. the
So we'll give them that will leave that configuration that on the Dewey Hall side.
Yeah, Dewey Hall, we move it to our right away to the sidewalk, back to the sidewalk.
We move this line to
Yeah.
here, yeah. So it keeps that there, and then in exchange.
Laura, we can even get.
The chatter is really challenging to hear on the recording side.
Yep.
Because there's 2 conversations with 2 different counselors.
Correct.
Maybe we can make this a little bit more clear and summarized. On the Dewey building, we are looking to sell to UVM land that is the public right of way to make a more traditional right of way property line boundary. And on the other side of the intersection, we are looking to buy from UVM the land for our intersection alignment project. And we would entertain questions.
Yeah, and it's essential to note that there's no swap. We can't give. We are selling, we are buying. In this situation, it's actually a net profit that we would be paying less for the property that we would be acquiring. So we're working with the attorney's office right now to get an understanding on how we can go about that process, and also working with permitting and inspecting and planning and zoning.
They're getting more land than we are.
Correct.
But this will allow us to realign, to straighten out this intersection, or?
Correct, that is the beauty. We did a scoping study, I don't know how many years ago, it was 10 years ago. Correct. Came up with a design, and the beauty is, not only will we get a safer intersection, we'll get a more efficient intersection because the north and south approaches on Prospect will be aligned. So we don't have split signal phase.
There you have it. You go down there, you see that there, and bicycle lanes will be able to fit within this new configuration.
We haven't done the full design yet. We can look to plan BTV walk bike to determine whether north-south accommodations are planned. There's certainly east-west accommodations on Colchester and Pearl that will be strengthened through this project.
Do you need any action from us? It's just informational.
We just want to make sure that you're supportive of this. It's really, in my mind, stepping off the amazing success that our team here did on University Place. And because University Place got turned to one way, it increases traffic at Pearl, Prospect, Colchester, making these efficiency and safety improvements all the more important. So we'd like to strike while the iron's hot, building momentum with UVM and getting this done. Wanted to make sure you all are on board.
I'm on board. I think you need to bring in the bicycle safety north to south on the Prospect. For anybody who's going from the south side the green, from wherever they're coming and going to the old north end or to the hill section there. And somebody who has tried to navigate the current intersection on a bike, it's tricky. So that just needs to be factored in to your planning.
Yeah, let's definitely consider all of those things, but before we can consider.
No, I got that. I just, in terms of your planning and your thinking as you're going through this, I personally support it.
I am as well.
Okay. That informs.
So we bring this to you guys tonight mostly for the fact that we don't have exact clear direction from our city attorney's office. But UVM is also very motivated to be a cooperative partner in this land give and take arrangement. So there could be an opportunity where we commence the process that's necessary through a Board of Finance action, because there is financial components, but we didn't want to skip the TEUC's awareness of this movement forward if we go in December versus a little later.
You're very good, Laura. Thank you.
As Chapin said, because we have a friendly VM, we want to strike while the iron is hot.
Never know about that, people. So it is important.
So I think that's all we need to discuss on this item, which moves us on to the director's report.
Given the hour, I'll leave it.
Okay, and I'll close the director's report. Updates.
Yeah, you're great.
I would just give a brief update that we're grateful that North Avenue is put back together on the new North Avenue. I will comment that there was some puddling at the transitions between driveways and the roadway, but I also noticed that there was additional work going on to pave there still. Well, it isn't going on still, but it was after the road was straight. So I'm assuming that was to address.
If you're noticing any problems, yeah, please let us know.
Yeah, it was a pretty heavy rain right after the paving was finished. But yes, thank you for doing that at such a late stage of the season.
Snuck it in. We're hoping to be paving Flint Avenue as part of the Champlain Parkway on Monday. So season's not over yet.
And our next, I guess, item is to schedule our next meeting. I know that there was some adjustment because of the Christmas week between Christmas and New Year.
Yeah.
And I think it looks like it's in here as 12/19. Is that the date that is good for?
That's what works for staff and what works for 645 Pine, just confirming that it works for the committee. It's a Monday, there's no council meeting. Council meetings are the 5th and 12th.
Yes, I can do that.
I can, this is the 19th.
Yes.
I can take the first day of Hanukkah and bring it here.
What commitment?
Look at that.
Public servant.
We can like,
We may want to consider whether or not that would be an appropriate date to have a meeting. So I appreciate what I'm hearing is 2 of you could make it, but let's see, because we don't want to be insensitive to members of our community who might want to participate.
That is a true thing.
How will we?
The earlier, if this is the first day, that would mean that sundown would be the ticket when and thereabouts, and it's probably a holiday for kids. It is definitely a holiday for kids.
Yeah.
More than anybody else, because you get presents.
What about late afternoon meeting?
Yes, that's sort of
3.
What is sundown?
Sundown.
Oh, yeah, and then it's about. I could meet earlier in the day.
I can too.
But
I'm free on the 19th right now.
Let's plan on a late afternoon meeting before sundown, and we'll coordinate via email.
Make sure we don't have a controversial topic with lots of public comment on the agenda so that we can end.
What I saw, what I heard was the solar setbacks. Sometime, whether it's this month or next, to continue the the conversation that was initiated last night with regional planning. I thought, you know, that's something I had raised previously. And I'd like to get car share in here. I think I had said, I don't have my list of people to get in.
Solar setbacks, car share, and what else?
Shinnecock
Regional planning, yeah.
Charlie Baker lived at our meeting last night.
Okay.
And if I could offer, that is the time frame that we would be looking to bring Main Street back to provide an update on where the plans and concept have moved to.
Is that too many for one meeting? We should probably.
Yeah. I think what we'll do is we'll see what's seasoning, and then we'll work with you as the chair to figure out what's a reasonable agenda.
Fair enough. Okay, and I know that Gene also wanted to discuss moving the repository for our meeting information from the Burlington.
I just want to make sure, and I think it was corrected there, that when you go to the calendar, and you know, the problem I've got is that if people look on the meeting tabs for, say, board docs, right, they're not going to find us.
That's
right?
correct.
And
it's likely going away.
It is, but you know, so there is this disconnect, and
This isn't the only committee that disconnect
Yeah.
exists for us. I agree. For me, as a new counselor, I go look on board docs for my information.
Yeah.
Then I had to go to the Burlington city website on the city council page to find the agendas for those other standing committees. So perhaps we could, as we pick a new platform, also consolidate all of that.
Staff is aligned with that. Right now, we have a system that is split. So let's, as we select a new system, select one that works for all public meetings.
And I think whatever the fix was to correct the problem that we had, was good. And
thanks for flagging that.
Well, these things happen.
Okay, I can't text him, run a meeting at the same time, so. I'm not texting. With that, I guess
I'll move to adjourn at 7:45.
we're adjourned. 7:25. Okay. Didn't look like we were.